everyone. Today we're going to talk about the ESFP personality type. So ESFPs are adaptable, they are social, authentic, adventurous, practical, and strong-willed. So I think one thing that really stands out about ESFPs is they usually seem like they are very social people. They can be the kind of people who will literally start talking to a stranger and just keep on talking with them for a long time. And I think it makes sense because generally the EF types are probably gonna be at least the most outwardly social types. And the ESFP is the type that is usually very interested in hearing about other people's experiences because they themselves, they always want to experience new things. That makes them very adventurous, right? So because of that, they are also interested in hearing about other people's experiences. So according to Carl Jung, they are the most realistic people. They are definitely the most adapted people to the world around them. He says about the ESP types, no other human type can equal the extroverted sensation type in realism. What he experiences, so the person of this type, what he experiences serves at most as a guide to fresh sensations. Anything new that comes within his range of interest is acquired by way of sensation and has to serve its ends. So there's this thing where even though they are definitely the most adapted to the world around them, there's a danger that I usually don't start with the weaknesses, but it's just this quote I was thinking about. There's this danger that they don't really reflect on the experiences they've had and instead they keep moving on and on to like new experiences without really understanding the value of the experiences. Yeah, so another thing that Jung says is, and I don't know, this really kind of helped me to remember what they're all about. He says to feel the object, so the object can be anything real, right, in front of them. So to feel the object, to have sensations, and if possible, enjoy them, that is his constant aim. So what I want to emphasize is that they are very focused on their senses. So they like to feel new things or see new things or hear new things. And what Jung also says, what's really interesting, is that once an object has given him a sensation, nothing more remains to be said or done about it. It cannot be anything except concrete and real. Conjectures that go beyond the concrete are admitted only on condition that they enhance sensation. The intensification does not necessarily have to be pleasurable, for this type need not be a common voluptuary. He is merely desirous of the strongest sensations, and these, by his very nature, he can receive only from outside. It doesn't, like what he says, it doesn't have to necessarily be pleasurable. Of course, naturally, anyone will prefer to have sensations that feel comfortable rather than uncomfortable. But it seems like what the expert sensing type, so the ESP type, does not want is never having, for them it's almost worse to never have any sensation at all than to have a bad sensation. Which I think the interesting thing is they can actually be very tolerant to also more negative sensations. Like, for example, being outside in the cold. They might still appreciate it because they're like, at least I feel something. And on the one hand, they need to experience new things. So it's difficult for them to stay in the same place for too long. It's difficult for them to have nothing to do. People might see them as if they are impulsive or maybe like they can't focus on the same thing for too long. So I would say that even though they can seem like maybe they are sometimes a bit like all over the place, they are maybe impatient, they want to do a lot of things, but it makes them strong. They can deal with a lot of things as well. These are also people, some of them are really good at sports. It's an example of how they can push themselves to the limit in terms of like physical stuff. For example, being an athlete. So yeah, in terms of jobs, they could also be, so like I said, sports could be. They're also very people-oriented usually. Some of them are creative. So they could also be, for example, an actor or a teacher. Or they could like to travel. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of ESFPs who also like to travel and maybe learn about different cultures and that kind of stuff. The thing that is interesting about them is I find that if you compare them with the ISFP is very authentic, right? It's like they want to be themselves, and at the same time they're still very active, they're still very social usually, or at least they are kind of in tune with the world around them. The ESFP, you will see that in practice they are true to themselves as well, just like the ISFP. They are usually people who have something about them that kind of stands out. They're not afraid of being themselves. They are not trying too hard to kind of impress other people. You will see that they are doing their own thing. They have certain things about them that are very unique because it's important to them that they are true to themselves. But when you compare them to the ISFP, they try harder to also kind of merge a bit more with the world around them, with the people around them. So it's almost like it's constantly a push and pull between their first two functions, between extroverted sensing and introverted feeling, because they want to maintain their sense of identity on the one hand, and they have very strong opinions about things. When they care about something, they really care. They cannot go against it. They have their strong values. But at the same time, they want to adapt, and they like to be social. They like to hear other people's experiences. You will notice that there is more of a wall between ISFPs and other people. There's more of a distance between them. And then the ESFPs, even though you will see that they still have their own identity, at the same time, they are still very adaptable to other people. They will only stop adapting if somehow their values are crossed, for example. And they can be very loyal people because they really start attaching themselves to people. They are very inclined to think about the human side of things rather than trying to analyze things, which is something the ESTP likes to do a bit more. So they can definitely be the type of people, I guess all the EF types as well in general, but especially the ESFPs, because they can be like one of the most outgoing people ever. People might be like, how does this person have so many friends? They're the type of people who will basically just accidentally have a lot of friends because everyone just ends up liking them. Because they're so adaptable, they're so open-minded and accepting usually of people, unless they cross their values, and just enjoy spending time with people. Yeah, so they're very practical people. And I wrote down, they're always moving, literally and figuratively. So they're most of the time, they are in the moment. They are really aware of what's going on around them. And I noticed that a lot of them, they might find it difficult to even just sit still, because they always want to be moving around. For example, just walking around might be more fun to them than sitting still and doing nothing. Unless maybe they're sitting still, but they still have something to watch or something. So yeah, besides being very observant, they are also quick to react. They can react very quickly to things. They can change what they're doing very quickly, just move on to the next thing. And they have very good realistic memory. Because they are so realistic, their memory is also realistic. They remember the real things around them. Good at remembering facts. or just literal things that they learned or heard, and definitely good at practical problem solving. So, for example, fixing something that's broken. A lot of their learning is a bit through just trying things out, kind of trial and error. But because they are so quick to kind of just keep doing things, keep taking actions, it means they can constantly move on to try a different solution until something actually works, and they're great at handling objects. So yeah, I think I'm also gonna compare them to the ENFP. I don't know why I am making all these comparisons, but I don't know, I just thought it was fun. So compared to the ENFP, they have this thing in common where besides being outgoing and liking new experiences and being adaptable, they also just really enjoy being social. Whereas the ETPs, they can sometimes mostly just wanna interact with people more so to just learn something, and then the EFPs might be more interested in actually like making friends, for example. But yeah, of course, the big difference between them and the ENFP is that the ESFP isn't very interested in a lot of abstract conversations and thinking about what ifs. They are much more focused on what is real, what's already there, rather than thinking about what ifs. And the ENFP does that like all the time. ENFPs are also very easily distracted, so that's why I would say something like, for example, ENFPs talk a lot and ESFPs do a lot. It's kind of that difference where even though an ENFP will definitely want to do things, they also talk a lot usually, and they are more specific about like, I want to do this because it's interesting. And the ESFP, meanwhile, while the ENFP was like gathering their thoughts, the ESFP has already done a lot of things in the meantime without a lot of thought necessarily about it. So yeah, I want to go into the cognitive functions for a second. So one thing that the ENFP and the ESFP have in common is that they have their second and third function are introvert feeling and extrovert thinking. So they have all this emotional stuff going on with them, but sometimes it's not always very obvious how emotional they actually are, mostly because sometimes they are in their extroverted mode, basically. They are focused on either extrovert sensing, extrovert thinking, or extrovert intuition, extrovert thinking, which means they are expressing themselves also through extrovert thinking, which means they can be pretty direct in their language and logical and just like stating the facts rather than being emotional, right? And keeping their emotions a bit more on the inside, where it's pretty easy sometimes to confuse them for a thinker when they're not. You can see that they are mostly motivated by their emotions all the time in terms of what actions are they gonna take, what are they gonna do, but you don't always see them expressing it all the time. And they can also have a sort of leader or take charge attitude sometimes when they're focused on their extroverted thinking a bit more. And they will kind of be like, okay, we should do this or we should do that to solve this problem or to get to a certain goal. Is kind of their, when we're talking about ESFPs, like their extrovert sensing, extrovert thinking loop. So they can either use it kind of to have a more kind of in charge attitude. They can also use it for practical problem solving, like discovering how to fix something in the moment, or how to plan something, how to do something in the most efficient way. So when we're talking about their weaknesses, one thing is that they have the weakness of both introverted thinking and also just intuition in general, which I think can maybe make them seem like they are not really focused on their own personal rational thoughts, basically. They might seem like they don't really like to think very deeply about things, even though, for example, ESTP They also don't like to use intuition, but they still like to analyze things, whereas the ESFP are a lot more focused on people, emotions, passions, right? Like just feeling their way more through life, and at the same time being very observational. So if you would compare them to the ESTP, I would say, for example, are they gonna create new theories? Probably not. The ESTP might try to do it, but they can only do it if it's still very grounded in reality, the thing that they're talking about. Then the ESFP probably doesn't really like to do that whatsoever. They are more focused on results, action, and if they're gonna use their thinking, if they're gonna be more analytical, it's probably gonna be more like in the moment. Like, I need to solve this problem right now. I'm not gonna create any kind of analysis in my mind or something. I'm just gonna do it. They are more so problem solvers in the moment rather than in their mind. So I would say, compared to the ECP, they make schedules, not theories. And yeah, they rely on facts. So I think there's this interesting thing where they will like to stay very specific about things. Someone asks them a question, they'll just give you the answer straight up, right? But if you're asking about more of like the underlying theories or stuff, they might get a bit confused. Like, why do you even want to know that? They'll be more focused on the practical application of things. And when I talked about the ISTJ recently, I said that they don't believe in the unseen. So ESFPs, they have the same problem, but if they want to develop their intuition more, of course, the ISTJ needed to be more extroverted. The ESFP needs to be more introverted and just stop for a moment, kind of stop being in the moment and being more focused on not the world around them, but focused on what's going on in my own mind. Of course, they might not like to do that at first. It might feel really uncomfortable to them, but this is where their growth lies. Because in their daily life, they will be a bit introverted sometimes, but they will still be focused on the reality around them. They have their function, their introverted feeling that they use to decide, like, how do I feel about things? What are my values? But how do I feel about probably real things? How do I feel about real experiences? And how does it relate to me? But it's all real, right? And there's nothing much creative about it. There's nothing much imaginative about it. One thing that basically all the people who have dominant sensing, one thing that they have in common is that they are very accepting of culture and traditions and stuff, because they, for example, the ESFP just adapts to how the world is, and they really want to work with it rather than trying to work against it and change anything. Whereas the intuitives are usually more interested in trying to change things because they are better at seeing possibilities for how things could maybe improve. So the ESFP, they might not believe that any change might actually work out unless they have seen it work out in reality. So that means that they can be a bit resistant to new ideas. It's this thing that they're fine with having new experiences, but they don't want to change their whole world view around, basically. Which means that they can get stuck sometimes in doing things how it has always been done and then not seeing any way to improve it. And they need it to learn things that are not necessarily obvious when you look at the experiences that you, well, experience. The things that are less obvious, the things that can help them to make better decisions. For example, yes, they have a lot of experience that they can learn from, but they will learn at first, they will learn the obvious. Like, oh, if I did this thing before and it went wrong, then yes, obviously, I'm not gonna wanna do that again. But how about comparing experiences with each other? Intuition will teach you things that you can learn from experiences that didn't necessarily actually happen, but that can be still inferred. So intuition can just collect these kind of abstract images about things, about life. Whereas if you would just be focused on sensing, you would just be thinking, okay, well, this person did this and said this, and that's what happened. And why would I think about it any longer? I'm just gonna move on to the next experience, right? I'm just gonna keep doing things. Why would I think about it for too long? Why would I even think about anything that's an abstract image? I don't want to be distracted from the reality around me right now. So if they learn to use their intuition more, they'll be able to see, for example, patterns, things that are reoccurring that intuition notices, but that would be too difficult to see it if you would only be focused on the details of the experience. This is why sometimes these people might not see things coming, and they might think that they shouldn't even try to predict the future because the future is uncertain anyway. So yeah, there's a danger that they might think that it's not necessary to ever reflect on their experiences, like what did I learn from my experiences. And then it's the opposite of, for example, the INFJ, where for the INFJ the danger lies more in I think that learning from my experiences is so important that I stop myself from experiencing more things, right? So they have the opposite problems. So let's summarize their cognitive functions. Their dominant function is extroverted sensing, which is the reason why they are very observant. They are realistic, practical, adaptable. They're connected to their body. They like to do a lot of new things. They are good at being in the moment. Then their auxiliary function is introverted feeling, which makes them seem like they have strong opinions about things. They have strong values. They care a lot about relationships with people. Then their tertiary function is extrovert thinking. I already talked about this. Usually it's this thing where, yes, they can be very focused on how do I basically do this practical problem solving, right? Or how do I organize things around me? How do I make things effective or efficient? Then their inferior function is introvert intuition. Yeah, it's the reason why I don't really like to have a lot of abstract or philosophical conversations about things. They don't like to think about the future very much, and they don't always see patterns. So I completely forgot to mention their weakest functions. Their weakest functions are introverted thinking, introverted intuition, and extroverted intuition. So that was the ESFP type summarized. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.